Right, first and foremost, I would like to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and double honors to the apostles and elders and bishops of Great Millstone. Today, we'll be going over Daniel 11 and 4 and the history behind it. But to start off, conflicts to come. Also, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. Now, Darius the Mede is historically known as Astyages, and he is the grandfather of Cyrus the Great on his mother's side. And now will I shew thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, which started with Cambyses II, on to Bardia, on to Darius the Great, which is not to be confused with Darius the Mede. And the fourth shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And that fourth king was Xerxes, which is the son of Darius the Great. And a mighty king shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And this mighty king being spoken about is Alexander the Greek, or Alexander the Great. And when he shall stand up, meaning Alexander was at his peak, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, right? Because after Alexander died, his kingdom, they broke into those civil wars, and it's going into the 4 areas that his 4 generals ultimately ended up ruling after those wars, and not to his posterity, because after Alexander died, his territory was divided. It didn't go to his children or his descendants. It didn't go to his posterity, but to his generals, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, right? Because, there was a certain way in things Alexander wanted to do during his rule. But when he died and his generals, they got the land. They did what they wanted to do, not according to his dominion, but according to their own. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. So, okay, now jump into First Maccabees. To read more on Alexander. First Maccabees 1 and 1. And it happened after that, Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and the Medes. Then he reigned in his stead the first over Greece, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, and so much that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. Right, his heart was lifted up. And this is what Daniel 11 and 4 is talking about when it says, and when he shall stand up. This was after he had did all his conquering, and that was when his kingdom was to be broken. And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth. Right? Because, in the previous video, as we were reading, we found out that some of those generals actually went to the same school as Alexander, namely Ptolemy and Cassander. So they were basically like his childhood friends, and part of his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule everyone in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. Okay, so now back here when it says his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided, we're going to get into the start of that division here with the partition of Babylon. This was a division of Alexander's kingdoms after he died. The partition of Babylon was the first of the conferences and ensuing agreements that divided the territories of Alexander the Great. It was held at Babylon in June 323 BC. Alexander's death at the age of 32 had left an empire that stretched from Greece all the way to India, right? Which we see here in this map. From Greece all the way here to India. The issue of succession resulted from the claims of the various supporters of Philip Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother, and the as of then unborn child of Alexander and Roxana, among others. The settlement saw Aridaeus and Alexander's child designated as joint kings with Perdiccas as regent. So Perdiccas is regent. Who is Perdiccas? Perdiccas was a Macedonian general, successor of Alexander the Great, and regent of Alexander's empire after his death. When Alexander was dying, he entrusted his signet ring to Perdiccas, initially the most preeminent of the successors. Perdiccas effectively ruled Alexander's increasingly unstable empire from Babylon for 3 years until his assassination, as the kings he ruled for were incapable. Perdiccas was born to Macedonian nobility, a supporter, Samothrax, and Heteroi of Alexander. He took part in Alexander's campaigns against the Achaemenid Persian Empire, distinguishing himself in Thebes and Gaugamela, and followed Alexander into India. When Alexander died in 323 BC, Perdiccas rose to become supreme commander of the imperial army, as well as regent for Alexander's vast empire, ruling on behalf of Alexander's intellectually disabled heir, King Philip III Aridaeus, and his infant son, King Alexander IV of Macedon. Alright, so, Perdiccas, he became regent because when a king dies and their rightful successor isn't able to rule just yet, and that's normally because maybe they're too young. But here, Alexander's half-brother, he was mentally ill, he wasn't stable, and his child was unborn. So Perdiccas became regent. So Perdiccas was basically like, he was a placeholder king, or he was acting king until the others were capable. So Perdiccas wasn't the actual king, but was ruling in the stead of Alexander's half-brother. Perdiccas gained supreme power, but also inherited the problems of Alexander's quickly conquered and unstable empire. To consolidate power and retain authority, Perdiccas crushed numerous revolts like that of Ariarathes and assassinated rivals like Meleager, which we will get more into later on. Perdiccas' position as regent was never fully secure, however, and his authority was repeatedly contested by other generals. His attempt to marry Cleopatra of Macedon, Alexander's sister, which would have given him claim to the Macedonian throne, angered critical generals, including Antipater, Craterus, and Antigonus, who decided to revolt against the regent in the First War of the Diadochi. And the Diadochi were Alexander's generals, his successors. In response to this formidable coalition and a provocation from another general, Ptolemy, Perdiccas invaded Egypt, but his soldiers mutinied and killed him in 320 BC when the invasion foundered. So Perdiccas, he died in mutiny. We're going back. So, now we know a little more on Perdiccas. The territories of the empire became satrapies divided between the senior officers of the Macedonian army and some local governors and rulers. So they became satrapies, and they were basically provinces ruled by like a governor, which were the of generals. The partition was solidified at the further agreements at Triparadisus and Persepolis, which Triparadisus is very important too. We're going to get into that later as well. Over the following years, and began a series of conflicts that compromised the wars of the Diadochi. So, boom. Looking at this map, so all of these areas were once controlled by Alexander, but after he died, it was split up amongst his generals. And we notice how it isn't just the four main generals that we know about. So why is that? What happened to where it just became those four generals and not the conglomeration of them? And we'll figure it out as we go on. But now getting into this, the partition of Triparadisus, this was basically, this came after the partition of Babylon. It was basically like a part two, or like a modification of the partition of Babylon. The partition of Triparadisus was a power-sharing agreement passed at Triparadisus in 321 BC between the generals, the Diadochi of Alexander the Great, in which they named a new region and arranged the repartition of the satrapies of Alexander's empire among themselves. It followed and modified the partition of Babylon made in 323 BC upon Alexander's death. So, back in Daniel 11:4, where it says, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven and not to his posterity. This is what we're reading about. These partitions are Alexander's kingdom being divided, but not to his posterity, because they actually, they tried to set up the kingdom through his posterity, but the Lord had it to where it didn't work out that way. And why was that? It was for prophecy's sake. Okay, following the death of Alexander, the rule of his empire was given to his half-brother Philip Aridaeus and Alexander's son, Alexander IV. However, since Philip was mentally ill and Alexander IV, born only after the death of his father, a regent was named Perdiccas. In the meantime, the former generals of Alexander were named satraps of the various regions of his empire. Several satraps were eager to gain more power, and when Ptolemy I Soter, satrap of Egypt, rebelled with other generals, Perdiccas moved against the former, but was killed by mutiny in his camp. Right, so, boom, here you have Alexander dies. Philip III, his half-brother, is mentally ill, so he can't rule. Alexander's son is too young, so he can't rule. So what happens? Perdiccas becomes regent, but then the generals under him rebel, and they kill him. So now since Perdiccas is dead, there isn't a king. So for the generals, it's basically like a free-for-all. Ptolemy declined the regency and instead brought to the office Python and Aridaeus. This designation met the strong opposition of Eurydice, wife of Philip III, leading in a meeting called in 321 BC at Triparadisus of all the generals to their replacement with Antipater. The meeting also proceeded to divide again the satrapies between the various generals. Right, so but after these partitions again, there are generals who end up getting more territory, which leads up to those Diadochi, or those main generals, those main successors that we learn about. But I say Diadochi, I mean Diadochi. The Diadochos, successors, were the rival generals, families, and friends of Alexander the Great, who fought to control over his empire after his death in 323 BC. The Wars of the Diadochi marked the beginning of the Hellenistic period, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River Valley. Which you can see that here. Once again, Mediterranean Sea, to the Indus River Valley. Well, going back on the map, we see those Diadochi. So, Ptolemy here, he has control over the blue area, Cassander, this green area, Lysimachus, the orange area, and Seleucus, this yellow area. And we're going to find out why Seleucus area, he has such a huge area. The most notable Diadochi include Ptolemy, Antigonus, Cassander, and Seleucus as the last remaining at the end of the wars of the successors ruling in Egypt, Asia Minor, Macedon, and Persia, respectively, all forging dynasties lasting several centuries. So here, the wars with successors is what we're going to get into. This is where we find out how, it becomes those final four generals and what happens to the rest. But there were basically like four major wars, but we're going to be focusing on the fourth one because that fourth one was the most key. It was the most key leading into further prophecy. The wars of the Diadochi, or wars of Alexander's successors, were a series of conflicts fought between the generals of Alexander the Great, known as the Diadochi, over who would rule his empire following his death. The fight occurred between 322 and 281 BC. And that's like a whole 41 years. So it took very long for this, but when we read it here in Daniel 11:4, it's just one verse. So that's why it's important to not only read but to learn the history of what you're reading as you're reading it, so we can get the full understanding. And right, but through these wars is why in Daniel 11:5 it focuses on what? The focus is switched to, and the king of the south shall be strong, right? It focuses to the king of the north and the king of the south. So it's like what happened through these wars to where we now have a king of the north and the south. A little bit more background. Alexander the Great died on June 10, 323 BC, leaving behind an empire that stretched from Macedon and the rest of Greece and Europe to the Indus Valley in South Asia. Once again, see that here in the map. South Asia, right? So the empire had no clear successor, right? Because not only what have we read about already, his half brother, who was rightful heir, he was mentally ill. Then his son was it was unborn, was too young. But it wasn't only that. But when Alexander and him and his father, when they ruled, they made sure that no one would try to dethrone or overthrow or usurp their positions. So now it's like, now that they're dead, there wasn't even any competitors who could come and take over after them. The empire had no clear successor, with the Argead family, which the Argead family was Alexander's line of his family. The Argead dynasty, also known as the Timonid dynasty, was an ancient Macedonian royal house of Dorian Greek provenance. They were the founders in the ruling dynasty of the Kingdom of Macedon from about 700 to 310 BC. Okay. At this point, consisting of Alexander's mentally disabled half-brother Aridaeus, his unborn son Alexander IV, his reputed illegitimate son Heracles, his mother Olympias, his sister Cleopatra, and his half-sisters Thessalonike and Cyane. Alexander's death was the catalyst for the disagreements that ensued between his former generals, resulting in a succession crisis, which, this is what we would expect. These agreements is like, because all these generals, they have their own territories, they all want to become king. So this is what we would expect to happen. Two main factions formed after the death of Alexander. The first of these was led by Meleager, which, his name came up previously, who supported the candidacy of Alexander's half-brother Aridaeus. The second was led by Perdiccas, the leading cavalry commander, who believed it would be best to wait until the birth of Alexander's unborn child by Roxana. Right, so, we have two sides. One saying let Aridaeus rule, and the other saying, no, let's wait until Alexander's son is born, then we have him become king. Both parties agreed to compromise, wherein Aridaeus would become king as Philip III and rule jointly with Roxana's child, providing it was a male heir, which, it was Alexander IV. But, right, so they're like, okay, we have a solution to this. Let's just have them rule together. Boom, problem solved. But it wasn't really. Perdiccas was designated as regent of the empire, with Meleager acting as his lieutenant. So Perdiccas is, Perdiccas, he's acting king, and Meleager is, right next to him. However, soon after, Perdiccas had Meleager and the other leaders who had opposed him murdered, and he assumed full control. Right? What did we read earlier? Perdiccas, he had rivals like Meleager killed. But why? Well, Perdiccas is now regent or acting king, and Meleager is lieutenant. But remember, Meleager, he led the side that wanted Aridaeus to rule, which opposed Perdiccas' side of Alexander's soon-to-be son ruling. So, there's already blood between them. What did it say? They were rivals. So Perdiccas, he's probably thinking it's a risk letting Meleager be under him instead of letting someone who just openly opposed him be so close, he decided, why not just kill him and the others with him? That way, my word is number one. There won't be anyone, whose voice can make a difference. And that's what he decided to do. He just decided to get rid of him. Right, so opposed him murdered, and he assumed full control. The generals who had supported Perdiccas were rewarded in the partition of Babylon by becoming satraps of the various parts of the empire. Ptolemy received Egypt, Laomedon received Syria and Phoenicia. Right, so it just goes on to, list who received what. So boom. Okay, so now we have all these generals ruling, right? They're ruling their own territories, but then what happens? They start to get greedy, which is what leads to the civil wars. Because now, okay, I got this territory, but I want this one, so I'm gonna go fight you and try to take yours, and boom, and it's just, a bunch of civil wars. First war, second war, third war, Babylonian war, fourth war. Remember, I'm going to be focusing on the fourth war because it was the most important one pertaining to prophecy. Its fourth war to Diadochi, 307 to 301 BC. Ptolemy had been expanding his power into the Aegean and to Cyprus, which we see here in this map. Ptolemy, Aegean, he's expanding here to Cyprus. while Seleucus went on a tour of the east to consolidate his control of the vast eastern territories of Alexander's empire. Right, so Ptolemy's, he's doing that. So Seleucus is just like, okay, let me go grab this over here in the east. So that's what Ptolemy's doing. That's what Seleucus is doing. Antigonus resumed the war, sending his son Demetrius to regain control over Greece. All right, because at this point in time, we're down to those 5 generals: Antigonus, Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachus, and Seleucus. And Antigonus was basically like the big bully of them. That big brother who's always bullying younger siblings. But why was that? Because this was not this one here. This was all the land that Antigonus ruled. So, because he had this much land, he was basically moving like as if he was already king. He was doing things and he was being a bully. But he was moving like he was already king. But the others, them seeing this, they were like, oh, nah, we gotta, they knew they had to put a stop to that, which is what they decided to do. And we want to read about that. So, all right, continuing, Antigonus resumed the war, sending his son Demetrius to regain control over Greece. In 307, he took Athens, expelling Demetrius of Phaleron, Cassander's governor, and proclaiming the city free again. So Antigonus' son Demetrius went to Athens, and he ousted Demetrius of Phaleron, which was Cassander's governor, and proclaimed the city free. So here Demetrius, he's causing problems for and bothering Cassander. That's what we meant by bullying. He's bullying them. Demetrius now turned his attention to Ptolemy, invading Cyprus and defeating Ptolemy's fleet at the Battle of Salamis. So here he's just doing more bullying. He just went over to bother Cassander. Now he's coming to bother Ptolemy. So boom, he went here at this to go mess with Cassander. Now he's here at Cyprus, messing with Ptolemy, just doing whatever he wants. Right. Okay, in the aftermath of this victory, Antigonus and Demetrius both assumed the crown, and they were shortly followed by Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and eventually Cassander. Now, it says they both assumed the crown and they were followed by the others, right? Which goes with the scriptures. First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 7. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants were ruled everyone in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. What does this say here? Antigonus and Demetrius both assumed crowns, and they were shortly followed by Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and eventually Cassander. In 306, Antigonus attempted to invade Egypt, but storms prevented Demetrius' fleet from supplying him, and he was forced to return home. Right, so Antigonus already had that huge area of land that it showed, and now he's trying to go take Egypt, which we know is under Ptolemy's rule. But storms prevented, because he was expecting help from his son, but his son couldn't make it because of bad weather. So they just scrap that idea. Now with Cassander and Ptolemy both weakened, and Seleucus still occupied in the east, Antigonus and Demetrius turned their attention to Rhodes, which was besieged by Demetrius' forces in 305 BC. The island was reinforced by troops from Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander, ultimately the Rhodians reached a compromise with Demetrius, they would support Antigonus and Demetrius against all enemies save their great ally Ptolemy. Ptolemy took the title of Soter, meaning savior, for his role in preventing the fall of Rhodes, but the victory was ultimately Demetrius's, as it left him with a free hand to attack Cassander in Greece. Alright, so we see this is how Ptolemy got to be known as Ptolemy the First Satyr, or Ptolemy the First Savior. Upon saving Rhodes, it was given to him. At the beginning of 304, Cassander managed to capture Salamis and besieged Athens. Athens petitioned Antigonus and Demetrius to come to their aid. Demetrius gathered a large fleet and landed his army in Boeotia in the rear of Cassander's forces. He freed the cities of Chalcis and Eretria, renewed the alliance with the Boeotian League and the Aetolian League. Raised the siege of Athens and drove Cassander's forces from central Greece. So here he is, he's still messing with Cassander. In the year of 303, Demetrius marched his army into the Peloponnese and took the cities of Sicyon and Corinth. He then campaigned in Argolis, Achaia, and Arcadia, bringing the northern and central Peloponnese into the Antigonid camp. In 303 to 302, Demetrius formed a new Hellenic league, the League of Corinth, with himself and his father as presidents, to defend, quote-unquote, the Greek cities against all enemies, and particularly Cassander. In the face of these catastrophes, Cassander sued for peace, but Antigonus rejected the claims, and Demetrius invaded Thessaly. Where he and Cassander battled in inconclusive engagements, but now Cassander called in aid from his allies, and Anatolia was invaded by Lysimachus, forcing Demetrius to leave Thessaly and send his armies to Asia Minor to assist his father. So here it's coming into the point where we have the generals. They basically temporarily unite against Antigonus, which will lead us to those solidified 4 generals. Because after they unite, they're going to take him down, leading to those 4 generals who had the pieces of Alexander's empire. But before he can get to 4, we have to take one away. So Antigonus got to go. His father, with assistance from Cassander, Lysimachus overran much of western Anatolia, but was soon, 301 BC, isolated by Antigonus and Demetrius near Ipsus. Here came the decisive intervention from Seleucus, who arrived in time to save Lysimachus from disaster and utterly crushed Antigonus at the Battle of Ipsus. The Battle of Ipsus was fought between some of the Diadochi, the successors of Alexander the Great, in 301 BC near the town of Ipsus in Phrygia. Antigonus I Monophthalmus, the Macedonian ruler of large parts of Asia, and his son Demetrius were pitted against a coalition of 3 other successors of Alexander: Cassander, ruler of Macedon, Lysimachus, ruler of Thrace, and Seleucus I Nicator, ruler of Babylonian and Persia. Right, so, here was the downfall of Antigonus. Antigonus was killed in the fight, and Demetrius fled back to Greece to attempt to preserve the remnants of his rule there. Lysimachus and Seleucus divided up Antigonus's Asian territories between them. Right, so that's why Seleucus had such a huge area because after they taken over Antigonus's, and they had divided the territories, his territory, and divided up Antigonus's Asian territories between them, with Lysimachus receiving Western Asia Minor and Seleucus the rest, except Cilicia and Lycia, which went to Cassander's brother Pleistorchus. So, right now, Antigonus is gone away with because it was Antigonus, Cassander, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Seleucus, but now it's down. So that was 5. Antigonus is gone now, so now we're down to those final main 4. Here Cassander, over here in the green, he basically had gained control over Macedon, in Greece. Ptolemy here in the blue, over Egypt, and then here he says Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and Lysimachus in the orange, Thrace and parts of Asia Minor, Seleucus, this huge area, parts of Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, Persia, and further east. So, going back to Daniel 11:4. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken. This is Alexander, and he died, leading to the civil wars within his kingdom. It shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. And now we see how that division came about, with the different partitions and the wars leading to the 4 generals and their territories, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. Right, because his generals ended up ruling, not his descendants, and they did so how they saw fit, not according to his dominion. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those which we read and went into. So, that was Daniel 11:4. Before we go, I would like to give once more all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, and Shalom.